Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Courtney Chandrea and I'm a writer and an astrologer, and today we are unpacking the astrology of Gabriela Cabazón Camara's We Are Green and Trembling. This is an ongoing series in which we use the publication date chart of any given novel as a way of getting deeper into the literary happenings of the story. And today we have an extra special episode in which I'm going to demo a new technique that I've been developing over the past couple of months for you. If you've been following me on my other platforms, you know that I've been in the process of creating a new kind of framework in which to unpack a birth chart from an ecological standpoint. The big question that I've been applying here is, can we use ecological language and concepts as a way of getting deeper into the chart, as a way of approaching the themes of a chart from a new angle, and perhaps gleaning something different from a typical birth chart reading from that analysis? And I thought that this book was the perfect candidate for unpacking some of these concepts because of the thematic nature of the book. It's very ecological in nature. So I'm super stoked to show you about how this framework works. And if you're interested in me reading your birth chart in this way, check out the description box below. I have links for where you can sign up for this kind of reading. And this particular offering is available on a sliding scale basis, so you can choose the payment tier that best suits your needs. Without further ado, let's get into it. As always, I like to start these videos by unpacking the context of the actual story. This is super helpful in grounding our reading of the chart because in any given birth chart, there's so many different dynamics happening, so many different things going on, and there's an infinite number of ways to read the chart, so it's helpful to lay that groundwork of context to direct our eyes towards what it is exactly that we're looking for. Gabriela Cabazón Camara's book, We Are Green and Trembling, is a book that is translated from the Argentinian. This is a fictional retelling of the life of Antonio de Erauso. This is a real-life historical figure known to be the most beloved trans man of Latin American history. Antonio de Erauso was born as Catalina back in their homeland of Spain, and from an early age was entered into a convent run by their aunt, who is the prioress of the convent. Catalina escaped her cloistered life from a young age, and from the moment she left the convent, she began to pass off as a boy as a way of surviving a new transient life, no longer under the auspices of her family of origin. Sometime after that moment, she became Antonio, recognized as a lieutenant in the conquest of the New World. And this novel aims to explore some of the themes of Antonio's lifetime. The primary mechanism of this book is metamorphosis. We have a really intimate look of what it was like for Catalina to become Antonio, how Antonio still contains Catalina inside of him, and also promises a final metamorphosis that takes place at the very end of this book. This final transformation embodies the Ouroboros nature of the natural world. The primary action of this novel drops us into the moment after Antonio has miraculously escaped from his own execution. He finds himself unmoored in the jungle with two small indigenous girls, two monkeys, a horse and her foal, as well as a dog named Red, all in his care. In gratitude for his life restored, Antonio has promised to the Virgin Mother Mary that he will write a never-ending confessional letter to his aunt, the prioress, as well as find a mythical grove of oranges in which he will feed these innocents that are now in his care. But as the story goes on, it turns out that the jungle has other plans for him. So with that groundwork laid, let's go ahead and pull up the chart. So first off, a little introduction to what is going on in this birth chart. We have the title here. It's cut off a little bit. You'll have to forgive me for that. As far as the date listed for this novel, this one was a really tricky one for me to find. Translated books always pose a little bit of trickiness because there are multiple editions after the original publication of the book in its original language. And I had to do a little bit of guesswork here. So I know that Gabriela Cabazón Camara is an Argentinian writer. I knew based off of the Goodreads page that this book was originally published by the Spanish language branch of Random House. I did a little bit of research as far as that Spanish language branch of Random House goes and found that they have an office based in Argentina, so I just went with that as the location in Buenos Aires. I set the time for 8 a.m. This is just like standard practice for me. I set the time as 8 a.m. because this is like when I imagine the first bookshops are open. And then the earliest date that I could find on this book's Goodreads page was September 22nd, 2023. So this is the date that I went with. This may not be strictly authoritative, but sometimes as astrologers, we have to work with what we're given and ultimately have faith that the oracle is somehow speaking through that information. And that information may be subject to change. And sometimes there's something like divinatory and oracular about that process of change too, so we're just keeping things light and flexible here as we move into this translation. I would also like to point out that there's a lot going on in this chart. You don't always see birth charts that are so spread out like this. And actually, there are a couple of dynamics about this chart that remind me of the sky right now when I think about this weird spread of outer planets that we have. A lot of people are referring to this as Barbeau's basket. I don't particularly like that terminology. I write about that more in depth on my Substack, but we're not going to go into that right now. I just find it really interesting that we have something of an echo of that going on with these outer planets in the later degrees of some of the feminine signs. So we have Pluto at 27 degrees Capricorn, we've got Neptune at 26 degrees of Pisces, and we have Uranus at 22 degrees of Taurus. And this Neptune, which is the center point of this outer planetary net, you could call it, is opposite this sun in Virgo. That's going to come up later. First, I just want to show you what I saw immediately that I found really interesting in exploring this novel about one of the most celebrated trans men in Latin American history, which is that we have Mars in Libra, the home sign of Venus, and here sextiling that Mars, we have Venus in Leo. This feels like some of the gender-bendy stuff that's going on in this novel. As mentioned, Antonio was born female but presents as this really martial figure as a lieutenant. But another major theme explored in this book is the way that Antonio continues to carry Catalina inside of himself. So written in this never-ending confessional letter that he writes to his aunt, he continues to resonate with himself as a little girl hiding behind his aunt's skirts at the convent. There's also the fact that directly related to his miraculous escape from his execution was the fact that he was singing in his sleep an old Castilian folk song with the voice of an angelic young girl, likely the voice of Catalina, right? So we have a really interesting relationship between both the feminine and the masculine parts of this character, Antonio. Both Libra and Leo are technically masculine signs, but Libra is arguably one of the more feminine masculine signs, being that it's in the domicile of Venus, who is our goddess of all things feminine. And then with Venus and Leo being this masculine, sort of outrageous, dramatic planet, we have some of this crossover between the masculine and feminine coded places, the feminine and masculine coded places, and we see a lot of this going on in the course of the novel. Using the ecological language of this new framework that I've been developing, we would call the relationship between the masculine parts of Antonio and the feminine parts of Antonio symbiotic. What that means is that there's something about this martial lieutenant side of Antonio that helps support and protect the feminine parts of Antonio and vice versa. It was the little girl Catalina that saved the life of Antonio the lieutenant. And likewise, it is the power and force and the ability to wield a sword of Antonio the lieutenant that can protect not only the soft feminine body that lives under Antonio's armor, but also these two young girls that find themselves in Antonio's care. We also have another really interesting dynamic that takes place between this Venus and this Jupiter in Taurus. Venus and Jupiter are sitting in a square to each other, and this classically is considered to be a tense dynamic. But using this ecological language that I've been playing with lately, I'm considering this an ecotone. And if you're unfamiliar with that word, essentially what an ecotone is when you have two different ecosystems crossing together, you can see that some of the qualities of each start to converge into each other and create this other third space where you have a little bit of each ecosystem going on, creating new diversity, new life, and somehow resolving the tensions that exist in these two very different worlds. Now we see this going on between Venus and Jupiter. Venus is in Leo, Jupiter is in Taurus. These places are considered to be in a tense relationship for a variety of reasons. For one thing, Leo is a naturally masculine place, as mentioned previously. Taurus is a naturally feminine space. But if we unpack that a little bit deeper, Taurus is very interested in things that are familiar, comfortable, easygoing, whereas Leo, it can have some of these easygoing qualities. Both Taurus and Leo are fixed signs after all, so they are both concerned in stability, but Leo is a fire sign, so it has a little bit more verve, a little bit more gumption. Leo's more willing to stick its neck out and make sacrifices than you often see Taurus willing to do. Taurus is very willing to put in the work, but it usually won't make a sacrifice if it comes with risk, and the same can't be said for Leo. If we think about this Venus in Leo as Catalina, the girl who ran away from the convent, we then might think of this Jupiter in Taurus as Catalina's aunt, the prioress. Jupiter often stands in for teachers, for spiritual figures, and in Taurus, this feels very convent-like, especially in the part of Spain that's known for being really beautiful and having orchards. And these are all some of the nostalgic qualities that Antonio looks back to in writing his confessional letters to his aunt. But there's a tension here, right? Catalina doesn't want to be bound to the strict, regulated life of the convent, even while she feels comfort and care from her aunt. And there's a way in which this dynamic between this Jupiter in Taurus and this Venus in Leo begins to shift and metamorphose throughout the timeline of the story. For example, Antonio has this obsession with the orange grove, which comes from a Castilian hymn in which the Virgin Mother, pregnant with a child, goes to somebody with an orchard and begs for fruit to feed the Christ child inside of her. Antonio seems to believe that if he can find this mythical orange grove in the jungles of Latin America, he will be absolved of any of his sins. There seems to be a direct correlation between the innocence of the Christ child and the innocence of these two indigenous girls that have found themselves in his care. The image of the orange is really interesting, and obviously it's significant, especially when we consider that the title of this book in its original language was essentially the girls of the orange. Jupiter rules fruit trees, and Jupiter in Taurus feels especially like a fruit tree. But when we think about the image of the orange too, there's something about the orange that is so much like the sun. And so we have this crossover between Jupiter in Taurus and this Venus in Leo. In the space between these places, we have the orange tree, the orange grove. But what's interesting is that in this novel, we never actually see an orange grove. They never find this mythical orange grove. They find something else. And that too is signified here in this place between Jupiter and Taurus and Venus and Leo. We have food coming to them by invisible hands. We have jaguars, which are so much like the lion associated with the sign of Leo. And we have the significance of trees. I'm going to leave it at that because I don't want to give too many spoilers, but if you've read the book, you can extrapolate on some of these themes yourself and see just how rich this space between these two different worlds really is. Now, the final dynamic that I want to look at is the one that I hinted at earlier in exploring this Sun in Virgo and this Neptune in Pisces. I'm going to leave these flanking planets to the side for now and just focus on this Neptune for the sake of time and clarity. But if you have any insights about what these planets might be doing, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. This video is meant to be a conversation starter to explore some of the themes going on in this book, so. Both this Sun in Virgo and this Neptune in Pisces feel really significant to the themes of this story. With the Sun in Virgo, we might see themes around redemption, themes around what is right and what is ethical, and finding purpose in making well thought out sacrifices. Here we see the penitence of Antonio as he attempts to make amends with his Virgin Mother through this confessional letter to his aunt, through his quest to find this mythical orange grove. But with the Sun being at the 29th degree of Virgo, this final degree of any given sign is called the anaretic degree, and it's a sign where things begin to culminate because those things are right on the cusp of changing. And so we have a sense here that this penitence that Antonio is clinging to is somehow about to crumble and turn into something else. And this is only amplified when we consider the fact that this Sun in Virgo is opposite Neptune in Pisces. Neptune in Pisces tends to obliterate the exacting qualities of the Sun in Virgo. The Sun in Virgo operates from a sense that everything is in its place. Neptune in Pisces pushes back and says that of course everything is in its place. It already is in its place because everything is one. We're all one spiritual being in one cosmic ocean of beingness. And any sort of manipulation that you're taking from that Virgoan standpoint is just meddling. Now, I'm not making a case for any particular leaning in either direction here. Both of these are necessary, essential parts of life. And actually, we can phrase this opposition as an ecotone as well, because here again, we have this tense dynamic taking place across these very different places, the place of Virgo and the place of Pisces, and ultimately we have to find some sense of reconciliation that takes place between them. Somewhere between Antonio's extreme penitence, his willingness to set things right, and the entangled beingness of the jungle as represented by this Neptune in Pisces, as well as the very different kind of wisdom presented by the indigenous girls that he is companioned with. One of my favorite parts of this whole book is just the snarky dialogue that takes place between the uber-Catholic Antonio and these two indigenous young girls who are probably no more than like 6 or 7. But they have so much wisdom. They're often making fun of Antonio for his black and white sense of right and wrong and the really weird stories that are presented in Christian cosmology as like scientific fact. But it's somewhere between this exacting redemption arc created by Antonio and this mushy entangledness of the jungle and the beings that make up the jungle, where we find Antonio ultimately making a final meaningful alms back to the life and the wisdom of the mother. I hope you enjoyed this breakdown. I had a lot of fun exploring some of the symbols at play in this book, and as I've mentioned, if this ecological framework is interesting to you and you'd like to check it out for yourself, check out the link down below. I'll have it highlighted. I'm calling this framework Your Birth Chart is an Ecosystem, and I'm offering it on a sliding scale, but I find this framework to be really helpful in creating new metaphors to explore the different relationship dynamics at play in our chart. And I think this framework is really good for looking at big picture stuff, seeing how the different parts of our charts are related to each other and entangled in each other. And it can also give us an impetus to look at parts of our charts that we might have been overlooking previously. Down below, I also have a couple of different offerings. I've got recorded readings. I also have tutoring sessions for people who are current students of Hellenistic astrology. So if any of those things appeal to you, definitely check it out. And as always, I would so appreciate it if you were to like and subscribe to this channel. If you have any thoughts you'd like to add, any books you'd like me to check out, you can throw all of that in the comment section below. I look forward to hearing from you. All right, until next time, bye-bye.